The night had just begun to breathe over Manila, painting the city in shades of gold and dust. The air was thick with noise, horns, footsteps, laughter, and the endless hum of survival. Amid the chaos stood a man with a worn-out guitar, his voice rising softly above the traffic lights and restless streets. Miguel Santos sang with his eyes closed, as if each note carried a piece of his soul. The world around him didn't stop, yet his music made time pause for those who truly listened. He wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He was just a man who refused to let his dreams fade with the noise of the city. The people passed him by, some tossing a few coins, others barely noticing. But his voice didn't tremble. It had learned to survive rejection, hunger, and silence. The same voice that once sang lullabies to his dying father now echoed through Manila's sleepless streets. A flickering light bulb above him revealed a small Elvis Presley poster taped to the back of his guitar case. Miguel called it his lucky charm. He had grown up watching black and white clips of Elvis, mimicking the moves, the tone, the spirit. But tonight, there was something different in the air, a heaviness in his voice, a quiet pain behind every lyric. From a cracked window across the narrow street, Lorna Santos, his mother, listened from her small bed. Her health had weakened, but her faith in her son hadn't. Every night, she waited for that familiar sound, her boy's voice blending with the night wind, keeping her heart alive a little longer. And then came the question, the one that lingered like the echo of his song. Can a man who sings in the shadows ever be heard by the world? The night deepened. The coins in his tin can barely jingled, but Miguel smiled anyway. In his heart, he carried something priceless, a voice that refused to die. No one knew that the man singing beneath the neon lights of Manila would soon stand before millions. And shake the world with a song that would bring the king back to life. Days turned into weeks, and the streets of Manila continued to carry Miguel's voice like a whispered prayer. He sang not for fame, but to feel alive, to remind himself that dreams still mattered, even when life forgot them. One humid afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the city's tangled wires, a stranger filmed Miguel singing, "Suspicious Minds." The voice was raw, soulful, aching with emotion. The clip spread across the internet like wildfire, crossing borders, crossing hearts. Within days, comments flooded in from people around the world, calling him, the Filipino Elvis. Miguel didn't believe it at first. Viral videos came and went. But then came the message, an official invitation from America's Got Talent. His heart stopped for a moment. The same stage he had watched all his life, the same judges he admired, were now calling his name. The nights that followed were restless. He sat beside his mother's bed, holding her hand as she smiled through her weakness. She whispered encouragement through her eyes, telling him to go, to chase what his father never could. The flight to America felt unreal. Miguel had never left the Philippines. The roar of the airplane engines felt like the heartbeat of a new beginning, a beginning born from struggle, pain, and a lifetime of holding on. As the plane cut through the clouds, Miguel stared out the window. Below him, the islands faded into blue, but his heart stayed anchored in Manila, with his mother, his guitar, and the street corner that raised him. Flashbacks filled his mind, the nights his father played the radio, the moments he fell asleep listening to Elvis, the days he dreamed of stages bigger than the sky. His dream had waited 30 years for this moment. He arrived in Los Angeles with a single suitcase and a voice that carried decades of hope. Yet beneath that hope lay fear, the fear of not being enough, of being forgotten again. But somewhere inside him, a quiet fire burned. A voice whispered through memory and music. "This is your time, Miguel. Sing, not to be heard, but to heal." The dream had begun its journey, and the world was about to listen. The day of the audition arrived with a stillness that felt almost sacred. The massive AGT auditorium stood like a cathedral of dreams, its lights blinding, its silence loud enough to make hearts tremble. Backstage, contestants whispered prayers, clutched hands, and stared at the golden stage that had changed so many lives before. Among them stood Miguel Santos, dressed simply in a faded black jacket and worn shoes. His old guitar hung from his shoulder, the same one he had played on the streets of Manila, now polished by hope. His fingers trembled as he held it, tracing the small photo of his mother taped near the strings. When his name was called, the moment felt unreal. The stage opened before him like a universe made of light. The crowd stretched endlessly, faces blurred by distance, cameras blinking like stars. He took a deep breath, the kind that carried every dream, every scar, every song his father once sang. The music began, soft, familiar, timeless. The opening chords of "Can't Help Falling in Love" filled the air. And then, he sang. The first note floated like a secret, tender, trembling, alive. The audience fell silent. Judges who had seen 1,000 singers leaned forward, their eyes widening as Miguel's voice grew stronger, deeper, soaked in emotion. It wasn't just mimicry, it was resurrection. The spirit of Elvis Presley seemed to breathe through him, not in imitation, but in spirit. Each lyric carried the ache of someone who had known hunger, loss, and unbreakable faith. The sound filled the hall, wrapping every listener in warmth and sorrow and beauty all at once. As he reached the final verse, his voice cracked slightly, not from weakness, but from truth. Tears welled in his eyes, and he looked up toward the ceiling lights as though singing to the heavens themselves. When the last note faded, the silence was deafening. Then came the roar, applause that rose like a storm, echoing through the rafters. The cameras captured it all, the trembling man on stage, the stunned faces, and the emotion that no words could describe. In that moment, the stage was no longer a stage. It was a rebirth, of a dream, of a legacy, of a man who had finally been heard. For a long moment, the world stood still. The stage lights flickered against Miguel's tear-streaked face as the applause grew into thunder. People were on their feet, waving, cheering, crying. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the raw, unfiltered truth of a dream reborn before their eyes. Then, through the blinding gold of the spotlights, one hand reached forward, Simon Carter's. His face, usually sharp and unreadable, softened with awe. A single press of a button sent the world into chaos. The golden buzzer exploded. Golden confetti rained down like a storm of stars, swirling around Miguel as he sank to his knees. He looked up, hands trembling, his heart unable to hold the weight of the moment. The stage became a blur of gold, light, and disbelief. The crowd's roar echoed in his ears, but inside him was silence, a deep, peaceful silence that only comes when a lifetime of pain finds meaning. Backstage, his phone buzzed with messages, his name spread across headlines, and the world began to know, the Filipino Elvis. But amid all the celebration, Miguel's thoughts drifted across oceans, to a small window in Manila, where his mother would be watching from her bed, waiting for his voice to reach her one more time. That night, he called home. Lorna's voice was faint, fragile, filled with pride and exhaustion. She told him how the neighbors had gathered to watch him on television, how the city had cheered for her boy. Her joy carried a quiet sadness, one Miguel didn't fully understand. Days turned into rehearsals, interviews, and flashing lights. But then came the message that shattered his new world: his mother's health had declined. The doctors said time was slipping away. Miguel stood by his hotel window, watching the Los Angeles skyline blur through tears. The dream he had chased his entire life now stood before him, but the woman who gave him that dream was slipping beyond reach. He didn't hesitate. The next morning, he packed his guitar, left behind the cameras, and boarded a flight back to Manila. Fame could wait. The world could wait. Because sometimes, even the brightest lights mean nothing when the one who taught you to shine is fading into the dark. The sky over Manila was heavy with rain when Miguel returned. The streets looked the same, crowded, chaotic, alive, but something inside him had changed. The city that once held his struggles now seemed to hold his purpose. He rushed through the hospital corridors, the guitar still slung across his shoulder, the confetti from the golden buzzer still tucked in his bag. When he reached his mother's room, the world grew quiet again. Lorna lay still, fragile, but when her eyes opened and saw him, they shone with a soft light, the kind that only a mother's love could hold. He sang for her that night. No cameras, no stage, no crowd, just the hum of machines and the rhythm of rain tapping on the glass. His voice trembled at first, but then it grew stronger, filling the room with warmth. It wasn't a performance, it was a prayer. A son singing to the heart that had carried him through every storm. Weeks passed, and though her body weakened, her spirit stayed. One morning, she asked him to return to America for the AGT finale, not as a contestant, but as a guest performer. She wanted the world to see what love could sound like. When Miguel stepped back on that grand stage months later, the lights didn't scare him anymore. He wasn't chasing a dream now, he was living his mother's. The moment the first note left his lips, the audience felt something shift. His voice carried the weight of distance, loss, and undying love. In Manila, nurses wheeled Lorna's bed near the hospital television. She smiled faintly as her son appeared, golden light surrounding him. When he sang the final words, her eyes filled with tears, proud, peaceful, complete. As the song ended, the crowd rose again, but Miguel didn't look for applause. He looked upward, whispering a silent thank you. After the show, he placed a small gold Elvis pin on his mother's bedside table, beside her photo. It wasn't a trophy, but something greater, a symbol of the dream they built together. The world would remember him as the Filipino Elvis, the man who brought back the king. But Miguel knew the truth, the real rebirth wasn't of Elvis. It was of love, faith, and a son who finally became the voice his mother always believed he was.